Tonight's story is called Compass Buried in the Sand. Subscribe to stay on top of the next story and hear more peaceful journeys like this. Each one made to help you drift off slowly, gently, and deeply. And before you close your eyes completely, we'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment below and let us know. Chapter 1: The Boy Who Found the Needle Pointing Home. The wind had changed. Not much, just a shift in how it curled around the rocks, how it tugged gently at the loose threads of a shirt sleeve, how it carried the faint scent of distant rain even though the sky above was wide and blue. Tess noticed it first. She always did. She stood barefoot on the cool grains of sand, the tide still far off, the waterline marked only by the shine of yesterday's driftwood. She held a pair of sandals by the straps, but didn't wear them. Sand was meant to be felt, she always said, especially in the morning before the day had fully arrived. Lark walked behind her, slower, hands in the pockets of a soft gray hoodie 2 sizes too big. His eyes were on the ground, like always, searching for something the beach might have left behind in the night. A shell with a hole through its center. A feather still holding the memory of flight. A smooth pebble that fit too perfectly in the palm. That's when he saw it. A glint of brass between 2 ripples in the sand. Not shiny, but not dull either. A quiet gleam. The kind that wasn't there 1 second, and then suddenly was. He knelt, brushed aside the grains with care. It was round, the size of a cookie, its cover slightly ajar as though it had opened on its own just before he reached it. Inside was a compass, but not the kind you'd expect. There was no glass, no labeled directions, no N for north or E for east. Just a thin black needle, suspended by something unseen, turning slowly, then stopping. It pointed toward the dunes. Lark blinked. Found something? Tess asked, stepping beside him. He held it up, and the wind, once still, pulled gently at his hoodie sleeve. A compass, she said. It doesn't say where it points. Just points. Tess tilted her head. Is it broken? No. I don't think it ever had directions. The wind shifted again, a little stronger this time. The needle quivered. And then, without warning, it turned. Not a wild spin. Not a twitch. A slow, sure sweep. Like it was thinking, remembering. And it settled on a new direction. Back toward the sea. Lark looked up. The beach stretched wide in both directions. No markers. No trails. Just sand and sea and sky. Maybe it's not pointing to a place, Tess said. Maybe it's pointing to a moment. Lark didn't say anything. He just kept the compass cupped in his hands like it was something breathing. That evening, Tess and Lark sat on the steps of the small wooden landing where the dunes began. The wind had stilled to a hush, and the sky had faded into that familiar silver pink that only came just before full night. Lark held the compass again. The needle had moved once more. but only slightly. Just enough to remind them it was still paying attention. "Where do you think it's going?" Tess asked, her voice soft. "Maybe it's not going anywhere," Lark replied. "Maybe it's showing us how to stay." That night, Tess placed the compass beside a small bowl of beach pebbles on the windowsill. The moonlight caught the metal rim, casting a faint line of reflection across the wooden floor. And downstairs, the waves, too far to see but never too far to hear, kept folding themselves gently along the shore, over and over, like a question waiting to be asked. Chapter 2, Where the Needle Waited. The next morning, Lark woke early. The air in the room was still cool, not yet warmed by the day. He sat up in bed slowly, eyes drifting toward the window where the compass still sat. The brass rim had gone faint with dew, and the needle had moved again, just slightly, tilting toward the northern part of the shoreline. It had moved in the night. Again. He held it in his hand and watched it settle. Not spin. Not tremble. Just decide. Tess was already outside by the time he stepped off the wooden landing and into the sand. She stood by the edge of the dune path, arms crossed, hoodie sleeves bunched at the elbows, watching the sea stretch out like it was breathing. Lark held up the compass. Tess turned. "It moved?" she asked. He nodded. They didn't say anything more for a while. The two of them simply walked south at first, until the compass shifted again and they corrected toward the edge of the dunes. There, past where the waves left their softest prints, they found the outline of something once covered. It looked like a piece of the shore had been peeled back. There wasn't much to see, just some worn timbers half buried in sand, twisted like ribs. But the compass needle pointed directly toward them, unwavering. "What is this?" Tess asked, crouching beside one of the beams. "Old boat?" Lark guessed. "Maybe a piece of dock." But even as he said it, it felt off. They explored slowly. Sand fell in quiet whispers as they brushed it away, revealing patterns carved into the wood. Not letters. Not symbols. Just curves and shallow grooves, like the marks of water running its fingers through something soft. Tess ran her hand across one. "It looks like the wind," Lark said. She nodded. The compass needle didn't move the entire time they stood there. Even when Tess stepped away and Lark tried walking a few paces back, the needle stayed fixed. It wasn't showing them a direction anymore. It was showing them a pause. That afternoon, the sky changed. Not with clouds or storm warnings, but with stillness. The wind stopped completely. No rustle in the dune grasses. No breath across the waves. Just silence, thick enough to feel. Back in the house, the compass sat quiet again, needle straight and still. "I think it's waiting," Tess said that evening as they watched the sky dim. "For what?" Lark asked. Tess didn't answer. But when they went to bed, Lark placed the compass by the window again. And this time, he left the curtains open. If it moved, he wanted the moonlight to catch it. they woke to a new shape on the beach. A long ripple carved into the sand, deep and narrow like a trench. But it wasn't from a tire, and it wasn't made by tide. It curved too gently, almost in a spiral, and it ended in a flat pool of seawater no bigger than a dinner table. Tess crouched at its edge. The water didn't slosh. It didn't even shimmer. It just sat, quiet, smooth, reflecting only the sky. Then she saw it. A piece of paper, submerged but perfectly preserved. She reached in slowly, lifted it. It wasn't wet. Lark came beside her, brushing sand off the surface. Lines. Shapes. Not a picture. Not a message. A map. Drawn in the same style as the old wooden grooves on the buried structure. Curves. Patterns. Not landmarks, but movements. Another wind map, Lark murmured. He looked down at the compass. Still pointing to the pool. Still waiting. Tess tucked the paper into her sketchbook and stood. This beach, she said quietly, has been holding on to more than just tide. Lark didn't answer. But when they walked home, the wind returned, barely a breath. Just enough to lift a curl of sand across their footprints before they could fade on their own. That night, as the stars turned gently overhead and the windows cooled with silver light, the compass needle shifted again. Just slightly. Toward the hills behind the dunes. And beneath it, on the edge of the desk, the wind map pressed flat against the wood as if it knew. It wasn't the last. Chapter 3, The Trail That Moved at Night. They both saw it first from their bedroom windows, faint lines through the dune grass, glowing under moonlight, too narrow for a person and too precise for an animal. Like something had drawn its path with a single fingertip, brushing through the world while everyone slept. By morning, the trail was gone. No footprints. No sand displaced. Just the wind, back in full, curling over the dune like it never stopped. But the compass had moved again. It pointed straight toward where the trail had been. Tess and Lark left early. The map they'd found, the one from the pool, was still tucked into Tess's sketchbook, and they'd spent part of the night tracing it. It wasn't a full layout of anything. Just paths. Curves. Spirals that seemed to bend in directions the real world didn't. Now, following the compass, they walked behind the dunes for the first time. The beach gave way to patches of scrub grass and gnarled driftwood logs, places where the wind had shaped more than just sand. And then, up ahead, a rise in the hill that had never looked like more than a bluff, now revealed an opening. Not a cave. Not a hole. Just a shallow bowl of earth, nestled into the hill, rimmed with the bleached bones of seed plants and smooth shell shards. Lark paused at the edge. Tess stepped in. At the center, the ground had hardened, packed tightly, like stone. And across its surface, shapes had been etched. Not carved. Not drawn. Just pressed in place. Another map. Larger than the others. And this one, still forming. As the wind curled over the rim of the hollow, fine grains of sand shifted. Each gust revealed a little more. Tess and Lark watched as lines widened. Swirls stretched. It was a living thing. The trail that had passed through the night had left its mark behind, not just as a path, but as a pattern. A direction. A memory caught in motion. Lark knelt. He reached into his satchel and pulled out their compass. The needle didn't spin. It bowed. Lower than before. As if it were nodding. They didn't speak much on the way home. Tess traced the new lines in her sketchbook, matching them to the faint curves they'd seen on the earlier map. Lark carried the compass in his palm the entire time, watching as the needle shifted, ever so slightly, with each turn they made. By the time they reached the house, the sun was sinking into the waves. But instead of heading inside, they turned toward the beach. There was something waiting. A figure, half submerged in the surf. They froze. Then it moved, not toward them, but away, drifting slowly along the shore, never fully leaving the water, never fully touched by it either. They followed. The tide had drawn a long arc of foam ahead, and each bubble that burst seemed to whisper a sound too low to name. Tess stepped beside Lark, clutching her sketchbook. The figure in the water paused, just long enough to turn its head. Not a person. Not a ghost. A memory. The shape looked like a girl, young, hair swept by waves instead of wind, but her eyes held the same stillness as the compass. She wasn't looking at them. She was looking through the beach. Like someone searching for a way back to something she never left. Then, just as the sun dropped, she vanished. Not with a splash. Not with a breeze. She simply wasn't there anymore. That night, the compass didn't move. But a new map appeared. This time, under their front step. Folded, wrapped in eelgrass, and sealed with a polished stone the color of dusk. Tess picked it up without a word. Lark turned the stone over. On the bottom, carved faintly, were the words, "Some trails are only real once you follow them." Chapter 4, The Metal Door from the Compass. The beach looked ordinary the next morning. Even the gulls were louder than usual, as if determined to pull Tess and Lark back into the kind of day they used to have, the kind with sunscreen, towels, and snacks that got a little too sandy. But the map under the front step, and the polished dusk-colored stone, still sat on Tess's desk. Neither of them had touched them again since last night. The compass had. When Lark checked it at dawn, the needle wasn't just pointing, it was quivering. Like something had stirred under it. The beach didn't need an invitation. They packed water, the maps, a flashlight, and Tess added a small metal key on a string she had found in a drawer but never used. It didn't belong to anything anymore, but something about today made her think maybe it did. The wind didn't push that day. It guided. They followed the trail on the new map, up the dunes, past the hollow where the edged map had appeared, and farther inland, where sand met wild sea fennel and the long grass tangled like slow water. Then they saw it. Half buried in the rise of a mossy bluff, the shape was too square to be natural. Tess dropped to her knees and brushed back the layered sand. Metal. Smooth, worn, not rusted but dulled by time and tide. The frame of a door, nestled in the earth as if it had sunk there long ago and been quietly forgotten. At the center, a circle. Not a handle. Not a lock. A compass rose. Without speaking, Lark set their compass on the circle. The needle spun once, twice, then stopped. A soft click echoed through the bluff. Then the door opened. It didn't swing. It lowered silently, like it had been waiting for something lighter than footsteps. Beneath it, a staircase of smooth stone curved downward, dry and lit by strips of sea glass embedded in the wall. Tess stepped down first. Lark followed, every footfall stirring faint echoes that dissolved before they reached the next step. The room at the bottom was round. Empty. At first. Then Tess noticed what lined the walls, not carvings. Not paintings. Maps. Hundreds of them. Some drawn in sand behind glass. Some etched on metal. Others woven into nets or pressed into slabs of driftwood, pale with salt. None were like the maps they knew. They didn't show places. They showed patterns. Wind paths. Moon pull. The echo of waves from storms that hadn't happened yet. One map showed footprints that turned into spirals. Another showed the shape the sea foam made when it crashed against shore in slow motion. Tess reached out, fingertips barely brushing a panel of blue-veined stone. The map beneath her hand shifted. Like a puddle of water before it becomes a wave, it shimmered and changed, revealing something else. A beach. Their beach. But different. Not another time. Another layer. One only the compass could find. Lark turned to the center of the room. A pedestal had risen. On top, another compass. Not theirs. Older. He lifted it. This one didn't have a needle. It had a thread of silver, floating, always pointing in one direction. Back to the beach. But it wasn't pointing toward the place they came from. It was pointing below. He held it to Tess. She nodded. And the floor opened. They didn't fall. They drifted, like leaves on still air, down a narrow shaft of light and warmth. Not hot. Not cold. Not wet. Just there, like the space between one breath and the next. Then, sand again. They landed softly at the bottom of what felt like a dome. The sky above was not sky. It was a curved ceiling made of mirrored shell and waterlight. And in the middle, a second door. This one carved with the same symbols they had seen in the earliest maps, spirals, not letters. Shapes, not instructions. Tess stepped forward, the old compass still glowing faintly in Lark's hands. When she touched the door, it opened. Inside, a single object. A compass. buried halfway in a smooth bowl of orange sand that glowed from within. The moment they saw it, they both knew. This was the original. The first one. The one that called the others. And it was waiting. Chapter 5: The Compass That Could Remember the Sea. The bowl of orange sand looked warm, almost soft, though there was no sun and no fire to explain the glow. It pulsed faintly as Tess stepped closer, as if it recognized the footsteps she took, or the time it had been waiting. Lark stood still, compass in hand. The one they'd followed down here, the one without a needle, only a silver thread, was now dark. Its purpose had ended. Now only the compass in the sand shimmered. It didn't spin. It didn't point. It hummed. Tess reached for it. Her fingers brushed the edge, and the orange grains swirled up like mist. But instead of rising, they spread wide, filling the air with patterns. Not just shapes, places. Not just maps, memory. The beach appeared. Their beach, not as it was now, but as it had once been. Then it shifted, and showed it again, and again, over and over, through years, through changes, through hands that once held the same compass, children like them, seekers, watchers, those who didn't walk the beach just to get across it but to feel what was underneath. The compass had been passed, forgotten, found again. It hadn't just guided. It had remembered. And now, it wanted to be held once more. Tess placed both hands around it. The room responded. The mirrored shell above them rippled, and scenes began to unfold along its surface, scenes not from maps, but from lives. Children building towers with seaweed flags. An old woman sitting in titterpools, whispering to shrimp. A boy counting the stars by tossing stones into the water until they matched. A family pressing their hands into the sand each morning as a kind of quiet promise. Then, Tess and Lark. Arriving. Exploring. Following. And now, standing at the end of the remembering. Tess turned to Lark, still holding the compass. "It's not just for finding," she said. Lark nodded. "It's for keeping." They both stepped back. The compass, still pulsing, floated just above the sand, as if unsure whether it wanted to be taken or simply seen. Then the walls began to shift. All around them, the dome turned slowly, smoothly, like the inside of a great globe. And in its turning, a new path opened. It didn't go deeper. It went outward. Back to the beach. The walk was silent, but not empty. Every step echoed with something soft, like breath or tide. The path led them through corridors of shell and sea glass, past resting places where other compasses had once waited and been taken. Some shelves were empty. Others still held objects that hummed faintly, waiting. They emerged into daylight. The sky had changed. Tess squinted. How long were we down there? Lark looked around. The sun was just over the waterline. Early morning. But it felt like days had passed inside. Maybe they had. The beach was empty, except for wind tracks and two small sets of footprints. The sand beneath them was warmer than before. When they turned to look back, the door they came through had already faded, folding into the dune behind them. No handle. No frame. Just beach. Back at their home, they placed the compass on the windowsill where light always reached it. It didn't pulse now, but it stayed warm. The maps were tucked back in their cloth, not to hide but to rest. And the drawer where Tess had kept the metal key. It clicked. Inside, when she opened it, were two things that hadn't been there before. A blank map, just one, on the same kind of thick, weatherproof paper they had followed before. And a smooth shell with a notch in the middle, like a coin that had been part of something larger. Lark held the shell. It hummed faintly in his hand. Another beginning? Tess asked. Lark smiled. Or maybe, he said, just another map that hasn't been drawn yet. They didn't go looking the next day. Some maps need time. Some compasses, too. But the beach still waited. And the compass still remembered. Even when it looked still. Even when it looked quiet. It was always pointing somewhere. Especially when no one was watching. The Golden Dolphin. Chapter 1, When the Waves First Spoke. There was once a stretch of coast where the sun always rose a little slower, and the tide pulled just a little longer before letting go. It wasn't marked on maps, nor remembered in stories. But if you ever stood there barefoot in the early light and closed your eyes, you might feel something stir beneath the hush of the sea, as if the water had something it had been meaning to say for a very long time. That's where Avon lived. Avon was the kind of boy who didn't hurry. He tied his sandals carefully each morning, even though he rarely wore them. He waited for the tea to steep until it darkened to the right shade, and he always paused at the edge of the dunes before walking the path down to the shore. And each day, the beach was different. Some days, the sand was strewn with long, curling ribbons of kelp. Other days, it lay clean and smooth, as if the waves had brushed it flat overnight. But no matter the day, Avon would bring the same thing in his pocket, a small, brass compass, its face cracked across the middle, its needle faintly trembling even when the wind held still. It hadn't pointed north in years. And that was fine with Avon, because he wasn't trying to go north. He was waiting for it to point somewhere else entirely. That morning, the compass needle did something strange. Instead of jittering weakly in all directions as it usually did, it paused. The tip of the arrow shivered, then slid slowly, deliberately, to the left. Toward the sea. Avon blinked. He tapped the glass gently. The needle didn't move again. So he followed. Down the shore he walked, past the usual driftwood and tide pools. The sky was pale, the air soft. Nothing seemed out of place. But still, the compass insisted. Left. Toward the rocks that jutted out past the bend, the ones no one liked to climb because the moss was slick and the tide ran high. Avon reached the rocks. The needle held steady. He took off his shoes. He climbed. Step by careful step, hands brushing the damp stones, he followed the quiet nudge of that trembling needle. And then he saw it. A shape, not quite a shadow, not quite a shimmer, gliding just beneath the surface near the deepest pool. It wasn't large, not frightening. It was shaped like a dolphin, but it gleamed with a color the sea had no name for, somewhere between sunlight and memory. Avon crouched. The dolphin rose. It didn't breach, didn't splash. It only surfaced enough for him to see its eyes, soft, gold-flecked, wide with something like recognition. And then it was gone. The water settled. But Avon's compass spun wildly. And in its spin, he knew the beach had spoken. And it wanted him to follow. Chapter 2, Where the Water Waited. The next morning, Avon was awake before the first gull stirred. The sky still wore its blue-gray sleepiness, and the tide whispered in faint, sweeping hushes, like it hadn't yet made up its mind about the day. Avon didn't hesitate. He packed a small satchel, a biscuit wrapped in linen, a flask of cool water, a notebook with only 3 pages left, and, of course, the compass. It still spun, though not with the wild energy of the day before. Now its needle slowed in places, hovered briefly, then moved again. It didn't seem confused. It felt deliberate. As though the path ahead wasn't made of land and trail, but of decisions. He headed back to the rocks. The same ones he had climbed the day before, damp with moss and shaded in morning mist. This time, he noticed something he hadn't before. There was a narrow ledge just past the deepest tidal pool. It couldn't be seen from the beach, nor from above the rock's crown. But from just the right angle, crouched low, eyes near the water, the edge was clear. And beyond it, a tunnel. Not a cave, exactly. It didn't open wide with gaping stone or echoing air. It sloped. Gentle. Subtle. Just a dip beneath an overhang, half submerged. A place where water gathered, paused, and waited. Avon's compass stilled. The needle pointed directly toward the entrance. He knelt at the ledge. The tide was low enough to reveal a soft floor of sand leading inward. He wouldn't have to swim, not yet. He looked once at the open sky, then slipped his feet into the cool water. Step by careful step, he entered. The sound changed immediately. Outside, the world had been open, wind, birds, and the distant roll of waves. Inside the tunnel, all of that dimmed. Now the only sounds were closer. A drop of water landing from some hidden height. The soft scuff of his steps through silty ground. And faintly, faintly, a hum. Not music, not words. Just a tone, like a memory of a song, resting somewhere in the walls. He followed it. The tunnel curved gently and opened into a small cavern, lit not by torches or sunlight, but by a glowing pool at its center. The light rippled upward, painting the ceiling with golden shadows. Floating in that pool was the dolphin. Still and slow, as though resting in the warmth of its own glow. Avon stepped closer. The dolphin turned. Its eye met his, and in that gaze, even felt something rise within him. Not fear, not confusion, but recognition. Not like meeting someone new, like remembering someone old. The dolphin circled the pool once, then dipped its nose toward the water's edge, where the sand was carved with soft, curved shapes. Spirals, mostly. And among them, a single symbol, a lemon. Not drawn. Not real. Not even yellow. Just a shape, a soft oval with a dot in the center. Avon blinked. He touched his satchel, where a lemon, smooth, ripe, taken from the bowl by his bed that morning on a whim, sat quietly. He didn't know why he packed it. Now he did. He set it gently on the sand, next to the carved symbol. The dolphin stilled. Its body shimmered brighter. Then, without a splash, it dove straight into the pool center and vanished. But the lemon remained. Only now, its peel glowed faintly with the same light the dolphin had left behind. Avon reached for it. The warmth was real. Chapter 3, The Tide That Left a Message. That night, Avon didn't sleep. Not because he was afraid, or restless, or even curious, but because something in him had changed, the same way a shoreline changes after a storm. Everything was still in place. The sand, the wind, the sound of the waves. But the shape was different. Quietly, completely different. The lemon glowed still. Just faintly, like it was holding onto something remembered. He had placed it on his windowsill when he got home, and it hadn't dimmed, hadn't faded. It looked perfectly ordinary to anyone else. But Avon knew better. He woke with the sun and stood barefoot on the warm boards of the porch, watching the horizon like it might blink. The wind tugged at his shirt. The compass sat beside the lemon, and once again, its needle spun. But slower now. It ticked in gentle movements, as if not lost but waiting for something to begin. He didn't bring the compass with him this time. He didn't bring the lemon either. Just his notebook and his feet. He walked back to the beach. But the tide had changed. Where yesterday there had been a narrow inlet and scattered sea glass, now the shoreline was different. The same sand, the same sky, but there were lines drawn through the wet shore. Not made by waves or birds or drifting seaweed. These lines were too clean. Too sharp. Letters. Words. At first he thought it was drift. Then coincidence. Then maybe someone else. But no, as he approached, he could see it clearly. Promise me again. He stared. The letters were already beginning to fade, tugged by the returning tide. By the time he reached them, the M was half washed, and the E was only a curl. But he had seen them. The sea had written to him. Or the dolphin. Or both. He sat down, notebook in lap, and traced the place where the words had been. Not copying, remembering. Not writing, listening. He stayed like that for hours. The beach was quiet that day. No gulls. No wind. Just the small lap of waves and the pulse of something under the sand, not quite motion, not quite sound. Avon didn't know what it was, only that it was there. By afternoon, he saw it again. Not the dolphin. The shape. Out on the water, just beyond the cove, a small roll of golden shimmer beneath the surface. Not movement. Not light. But something between. He stood. His notebook fell, pages flapping in the breeze. He took one step forward, then another. But the water remained still. Just as he reached the shore's edge, another wave rolled in, this one stronger than the others. It swept past his ankles, clean and warm, and left something behind. A shell. Not large. Not strange. Just a single spiral shell, the kind usually half buried or broken. Except this one was carved. Tiny lines ran across its surface, not random, not worn, but shaped. Avon knelt. The pattern was familiar. He opened his notebook and flipped to a page he'd drawn weeks before, lines in the wind, sketched at random. It matched. Perfectly. It had been left for him. Not just today. Not just by the sea. But long ago. He picked up the shell. Held it to his ear. He didn't hear the ocean. He heard a sound like soft breathing, timed with the waves. Like someone, something, still waiting. A whisper followed. There's more than one kind of map. He turned the shell over. There, on the inside curve, carved so small he nearly missed it, was a mark. The same lemon symbol from the tunnel. Only this time, beneath it, a new mark. A wave, curling inward. And a small dot beneath it. An island? Avon looked toward the horizon. For the first time in his life, he wondered, what if the ocean wasn't keeping things from him? What if it was calling him back? Chapter 4, The Island That Glowed Beneath the Tide. That night, Avon had a dream. It wasn't a loud dream or a confusing one. It was soft. Like someone turning the pages of a book in another room. He dreamed of the island. Not an island. The island, the one that didn't exist on any map. The one from the shell. In the dream, he stood on a beach of smooth stones that clicked when the wind blew. The trees swayed with silver leaves, and the tide came in without a sound. Above it all, the sky wasn't blue. It wasn't even night. It was a soft, pale amber, as if the world had paused at golden hour and forgotten how to move on. At the center of the dream, something shimmered. A shape. A fin? No, a silhouette. A figure standing just where the ocean met the sand. They didn't speak. They didn't wave. But when Avon woke, his pillow smelled faintly of salt and lemon. He didn't wait that morning. He took the compass and the shell. He tucked a lemon slice into a sealed jar. He packed a notebook, a smooth stone, and a length of string. And he returned to the beach. The shoreline was shifting again. This time, where the tide pulled back, there were ripples in the sand shaped like stairs. As if the waves had remembered how to step instead of flow. He walked along the patterns. They twisted and turned until finally, a shallow tide pool, shaped like a spiral. In its center was something golden. He thought it might be sunlight at first. But no, it was the dolphin. Resting. Still. Its eyes closed, body curved. Not dead. Just waiting. Avon stepped into the pool. The water felt warmer than the rest of the sea. It felt old. Like it had been here before the beach, before the maps. The dolphin opened one eye. Not like an animal winking. Like someone recognizing you in a place you both remembered. You brought the map, a voice said. Avon looked around. There was no one. Not in your hand, the voice continued. In you. He didn't respond. He only knelt quietly and held out the shell. The dolphin didn't take it. Instead, the tide around them changed. Water pulled away, not to expose something, but to draw something. A glowing path beneath the shallows. Soft golden light, snaking through the sand. Avon followed. He didn't know how long he walked. He didn't care. The path curved and widened, sometimes narrowing to barely his shoulders, other times opening into wide spaces lined with shells and soft light. Finally, it ended at the foot of a rise, a low mound just offshore. It didn't look like much. But as he stepped onto it, something shifted. The sand beneath his feet hardened. The light beneath it surged. And the mound rose. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Like something waking gently from a long nap. A ridge appeared. A curve. A doorway. And on the other side, air. Avon stepped in. The walls inside were smooth, built from something not quite rock, not quite coral. It wasn't a cave. It was a room. In the center, suspended in water, floated a glowing sphere, the size of a melon, pulsing slowly. He approached it. The sphere didn't react. But the compass in his hand did. It spun once. Twice. Then settled. Pointing not north, but down. Beneath the sphere, at the very bottom of the room, was a slab, smooth, pale, carved with the same symbols as the shell. He stepped forward and placed the compass onto the stone. The moment it touched, the room shifted. Light filled the space. Not blinding. Just everywhere. Like the ocean had turned itself inside out to reveal something hidden. And then, a voice. You remembered. Even when you didn't know. The voice wasn't loud. It wasn't human. It was the tide itself, speaking in the rhythm of waves. The ocean always keeps its promises, even if they take time. Avon closed his eyes. The lemon. The dolphin. The shell. The strange staircase in the sand. It hadn't been randomness. It had been a path, a memory he didn't know he was holding. And now, the island wasn't a dream. It was real. Chapter 5: The Promise That Took Root in the Sea. The light from the sphere faded slowly, like a candle that chose to rest, not burn out. Avon remained still in the heart of the underwater chamber. The water was warm around his ankles, but nothing else moved. The dolphin was gone from sight, yet not from the moment. He could still feel it, like a presence held softly in the shape of the room itself. He took a deep breath, and then another. When he turned to leave, the compass no longer pointed in any direction. Its needle lay still, quiet as a sleeping bird. But Avon didn't feel lost. He felt, for the first time, that everything was where it belonged. Outside, the path beneath the water still glowed. Not as bright now, but steady. Trusting. He followed it back to shore. The tide had shifted again, and the spiraled stairs were gone, replaced by a long, soft stretch of beach lined with bits of smooth stone and driftwood. The sky held a lavender edge, just beginning to let go of the day. And ahead, standing on the shore like she had never left, was Mira. She smiled before he could speak. "I thought I saw the light again," she said softly, glancing at the ocean. "It's been years, but it felt the same." Avon stepped forward and pulled something from his pocket. The compass. It no longer spun or shimmered, but it was warm. He handed it to her without saying why. Mira looked down at it, cradling it like a memory returned. "You kept it safe," she said. Avon didn't nod. Didn't answer. He only looked at the sea. The golden dolphin had not been a messenger, not a guide. It had been something else entirely. A promise. The kind made before memory, held in the hush of tentacles and low clouds. And now, something was changing. The tide rolled back slower, more deliberately. The beach seemed wider somehow, the sand deeper beneath their feet. Even the sky seemed to lean in, listening for what would come next. "Will it return?" Mira asked. Avon didn't know, but he said, "We will." They stood together, two kids with sand-dusted ankles and salt-marked clothes, and watched as the last rays of sunlight slipped into the sea. Somewhere far beneath them, the golden dolphin swam again, not waiting, not wondering, just being. A promise once made. A promise still held. That night, Avon returned home. He placed the shell on the windowsill, just where the moonlight could touch it. He didn't need to ask it for stories anymore. He already carried them. In the drawer beside his bed, where he once kept stones and string, he placed one final item. A folded piece of paper, drawn in pencil. A map. It didn't show roads, or landmarks, or names. Only a curve of wind, a shimmer of sand, and the tiniest glint of gold just off the shore. 2 silver coins in a box. Chapter 1: When the waves brought the box. The beach had been quiet for most of the morning. Not the kind of quiet that asked for anything, just the kind that settled into your shoes, your shoulders, and your breath without being noticed. The tide was slow, the sun was kind, and the wind moved just enough to stir the edges of thought. On this particular stretch of sand, broad and pale and unmarked, a boy named Milo and a girl named Lila wandered just after dawn. They weren't running. They weren't talking much either. Just moving, the way low waves do when no one is watching. Milo carried a small, folded kite under his arm, but he wasn't flying it. Lila walked with her hands tucked behind her back, toes tracing loops in the sand. They had both come to this beach because it was theirs now, in a way no one else had really claimed. Their families had moved into the village nearby only weeks ago, but this stretch of sand already felt older than anything they'd ever known. It was Lila who first spotted it. She stopped without warning, squinting toward the place where the tide had just left a scalloped line of seaweed and foam. A thin shape jutted up from the sand, no bigger than a shell but too square to be one. "What's that?" she said softly. Milo tilted his head. "Piece of driftwood?" "No. I think it's a box." They walked closer, the morning light warming the tops of their shoulders. The object wasn't large, about the size of two cupped hands, covered in wet sand, smooth but weathered. A simple box made of something dull and gray, metal, maybe, or something older. And on the top, pressed into the center, were two silver coins. Not glued. Not attached. Just resting. Lila crouched first. She didn't reach for the coins. She only looked at them. Are they real? They look real. Milo reached down slowly, brushing a fingertip across one of the coins. It was cold, like it hadn't noticed the sun yet. "I think they're part of it," he said. "They fit right in that space." "Try lifting one," Lila said. He hesitated, then gently pinched the edge of a coin and lifted it from the box's top. It came away cleanly, without a sound. He turned it over. One side had the image of a star-shaped plant, something like coral. The other was smooth, almost mirrored. He offered it to Lila. She held it in her palm. It felt heavier than it looked. Milo lifted the second coin and placed both in the pocket of his jacket. "Should we open it?" he asked. Lila nodded once. He knelt beside the box, fingers curled around its edges. With a small tug, the lid gave way. No click. No resistance. Just an easy shift, like the box had been waiting for them. Inside was a folded piece of canvas, neatly tucked. No writing, no lock. Just soft, ocean-dampened cloth, and a tiny glass vial tucked into its folds, sealed with a cork, nearly weightless, but holding a pale shimmer of something inside. "What is it?" Lila whispered. Milo didn't know. He turned the vial slowly in his fingers. The shimmer inside moved with a sleepy grace, like something that had been floating for a long time. "I think it's for something," he said. They both sat back on the sand. The wind made a new shape around them. The box, the coins, the cloth, and the vial sat quietly between them, undemanding, but present. Not heavy with answers, just resting in the morning light, asking nothing. But they both felt it. Whatever this was, it wasn't lost. Chapter 2, The Marks Beneath the Sand. Milo couldn't sleep that night. Even with the windows open and the ocean humming faintly beyond the dunes, something about the box stayed with him, like a word he almost remembered, or a tune that wouldn't settle. He had placed the 2 silver coins on his bedside table, just far enough apart that they didn't touch. The box itself sat on his desk, its canvas and tiny vial tucked neatly back inside. The coins still looked clean, untouched by sand, untouched by time. Down the street, Lila was awake too. She tucked her own small shell collection beside her bed the way she always did, and yet her thoughts curled back to the shimmer in the vial and the way the wind had changed the moment they opened the box. Not loud or frightening, just different. As if something had adjusted around them, slightly, with quiet care. By morning, they were both back at the beach. Neither had suggested it. They just arrived, within minutes of each other, feet bare and eyes searching not the horizon, but the place just above their toes, the sand that shifted slightly with every breeze. "I brought the coins," Milo said, holding them up. "I brought string," Lila said. "And a notebook." They didn't talk about the box. Not yet. Instead, they walked back to the place where they had found it, the waterline lower now, the tide pulling away like a page being turned. The box wasn't there anymore, of course. They'd taken it. But something else was. Just beneath where the sand had settled overnight were faint marks. Lines. Soft, shallow grooves in a circular pattern, almost like drift trails left by crabs, but too deliberate. Too clean. Milo dropped to his knees, brushing lightly. Lila opened her notebook and began to sketch. At the center of the markings was a shape, a shallow spiral that didn't close. It curled inward but stopped before reaching the middle, where a small depression in the sand, no bigger than a thumbprint, waited. "I think it's a map," Lila said. "No directions. Not that kind of map." She was right. There were no arrows, no letters or names. But the lines had rhythm. A looping, layered feeling, like someone had drawn the wind instead of roads. Milo reached into his pocket and placed one of the silver coins into the center dip. It fit. Perfectly. As soon as the coin settled, something shifted in the air, not louder, not colder, just deeper. The sand around the spiral pattern darkened slightly, and a gust of wind curled upward, lifting the smallest grains in a soft swirl. "Did you see that?" Milo whispered. Lila nodded. Neither of them moved. The second coin still rested in Milo's hand, warm now, warmer than before. He set it beside the first, just outside the spiral. Nothing happened immediately. But then, slowly, the shallow groove beside the second coin deepened. only by a breath, only for a moment. It was enough. The box wasn't a message, Lila said. It was a key. Then what's it opening? She didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because she didn't know how to say it. Instead, she traced the spiral pattern again in her notebook. This time, as she sketched, she added the placement of the coin. And as she did, she noticed something else. There's another spiral here, she said, turning the notebook. But it's fainter. It goes the other direction. Milo leaned over her shoulder, like it's part of something mirrored. Or folded. That word, folded, stuck in Milo's thoughts. Like the canvas in the box. Like the maps Lila always drew. He looked at the sand again. Something about the two spirals, facing opposite directions, reminded him of the two coins. Not just separate, but balanced. Two. Always two. What if there are more? He asked. Lila looked up. Boxes? He nodded. Or places like this. Marked, but buried. They both sat back, the sea quiet in the distance, the pattern beneath their knees barely visible now. The coins remained in place, patient. And then Lila noticed something strange. Her notebook, though she hadn't flipped any pages, now had a small wrinkle in the corner of the paper. One she didn't remember. A faint stain, like salt water had dried there long ago. She looked at Milo. I didn't do that. He didn't answer. His gaze was locked on something to her left. Another coin. No, not a coin. But something round and pale, half buried in the sand, glinting slightly. Lila moved toward it, heart quickening. She brushed the sand away. It wasn't a coin. It was a stone. Flat, smooth, and carved with a swirl, just like the ones on the box. But this one was attached to something beneath it. Wood. Or maybe metal. She couldn't tell. She and Milo looked at each other. Another box? Or something else? They dug slowly, fingers working through wet sand until the edge of the object revealed itself, larger than the first. Still sealed. No hinges. No handle. Just the same silver mark in the center, waiting. And next to it, pressed into the sand, a single feather, soaked in sea spray, but impossibly dry to the touch. Chapter 3, The Feather That Drew a Line in the Sand. The feather should have been soaked. The morning tide had swept this part of the beach clean just an hour earlier, and yet, there it lay. White and pale gray, soft at the base and stiff at the edge. Dry as driftwood left too long in the sun. Milo held it lightly in his hand, turning it once, then twice. It's not normal, he said. Lila reached into her notebook and flipped to a fresh page. Without asking, she began to sketch the object they'd unearthed, the larger box, the swirl etched on its lid, and now, the feather. She labeled it quietly in the corner, found near coin pattern, second box. No hinges. The new box was rectangular, but not perfectly so. The edges weren't clean like the first one. They bent slightly, like the whole thing had been shaped by pressure or time. It had a weight to it, even before they dug it all the way out. Not just the heaviness of what it was made of, but of where it had come from. As if the sand had been holding it for far longer than a single night. What if the coins unlocked this too? Lila asked. They didn't fit. We tried them. I didn't mean physically. The moment the feather touched the lid, everything stilled. No breeze. No bird calls. Even the distant hush of waves dulled, like someone had placed a blanket over the air. Then, as gently as a breath, the lid shifted. It didn't creak. It didn't crack. It simply moved. Like a thought that had been waiting to be spoken. They both leaned closer, careful not to break whatever permission had been granted. Inside was a folded piece of pale seaworm cloth. And wrapped within it, a long strand of copper wire, curled and bent into a shape that looked almost like a question mark, but not quite. Alongside it, resting carefully within a small groove in the cloth, was a stone. Not silver. Not shining. Just a stone the color of dusk. Deep gray, with a single line running through it like it had once been snapped in half, then sealed again. I think it's broken, Milo whispered. Lila touched the stone gently. Or it was. They sat in silence. Sometimes, the important things didn't need filling. Eventually, Milo stood. I want to try something. He picked up the feather and walked a few steps away from the box, then knelt where the tide had just pulled back. With the feather's tip, he began to draw a line in the sand. Slow. Careful. The way the box's spiral had moved. The way the coin grooves curved. Lila watched. She didn't speak. When he finished, the feather's path left a narrow swirl, like the pattern in the sand from the day before, only this one pointed outward, not in. It curved away from the center and toward the sea. And when the final loop was drawn, something happened beneath his knees. The sand shimmered, not with light, but with temperature. It grew suddenly warm, just in that small spiral, and a faint shape began to emerge at the edge of the curve. A shell. No, not a shell. A third coin. Tarnished, this time. Not gleaming. Its silver was dull, worn like it had seen more years than the others combined. Milo picked it up. The spiral was etched on one side, but reversed, curling counter to the first two. On the other side, a mark they hadn't seen before. A horizon. 3 lines, one curved, one flat, one jagged like distant cliffs. Do you think it was drawn with the feather too? Lila asked. Milo nodded slowly. Or for it. Back at the second box, Lila began to arrange the contents on the cloth, spacing the wire, the dusk-colored stone, and the third coin in a triangle. She didn't know why. It just felt right. And when she finished, the copper wire vibrated softly, so faintly she thought at first it was the wind. But it wasn't. The wire had shifted shape. No longer a question mark. Now it pointed toward the dunes. They followed the new path in silence. They didn't need words, not with the feather in Milo's hand and the wire held flat on Lila's palm, trembling softly with every few steps. As they reached the edge of the beach, where dry grasses met wind-polished sand, Lila paused. The wire had stopped moving. Beneath their feet, the ground was more solid now, not quite sand, not quite soil. It was the in-between part of the beach. The part that changed depending on the weather, the tide, or the way you looked at it. Milo raised the feather once more. This time, he drew a straight line. And just like before, the sand warmed. Only now, it cracked. A thin seam opened down the line he had drawn, not deep, but deliberate. As if something beneath it had breathed out, relief to be found. They stepped back, watching. From the crack came no sound. Just a shift in pressure, like standing too close to thunder that had already passed. Then something small rose from the line. Another coin? No. A piece of cloth. Familiar. The same kind that had lined the second box. Milo reached for it, pulling carefully. The cloth unfurled with surprising ease, revealing something wrapped inside. A fourth coin. This one wasn't silver. It was made of stone. No etchings. No spiral. Just smooth, cool weight. But on its edge, barely visible, was a set of marks, like the teeth of a compass or an old watch. Points that might once have turned, or been turned by something. They had found 2 coins. Then another. Now a fourth. Only this one didn't want to lead. It felt like it wanted to end. Chapter 4. The Box That Didn't Want to Be Found. Lila turned the 4th coin in her hand. It wasn't cold anymore. The stone had warmed as she held it, but not from the sun. The sky was overcast now, and the wind had picked up, whipping through the dune grass and shaking the edges of their notebooks. Yet the coin pulsed faintly with a heat that seemed to come from inside. Not burning. Not glowing. Just alive. Milo crouched beside her. "This one's different," he said. "It doesn't point. It doesn't need to." They sat together on the narrow slope of land where the sand turned dense and dark, a place the sea rarely touched. The kind of place you wouldn't stop unless something told you to. And now, something had. 4 coins. 2 boxes. 1 feather. And a compass made from copper that no longer quivered. The wire had stilled. Lila placed the stone coin beside the others. They made no pattern. No clear map or order. But somehow, it felt like each belonged with the others. As if all of them came from the same story, even if it hadn't been told yet. Milo looked out across the beach. The tide had receded, leaving behind low, glistening ridges. It looked like a thumbprint stretched wide, pressed gently into the skin of the earth. Then he saw it. Farther down the shore, tucked into a low cut where the dunes dipped inward, a shape. It could have been a rock. Could have been a pile of tangled seaweed. But Milo had seen shapes like this before. Box-like. Unassuming. Waiting. He stood. Don't you think it's strange how none of these boxes were ever buried too deep? He asked. Lila blinked up at him. They're always just under, he said. Like they were placed there. Like they weren't lost, they were left. Lila felt the thought curl inside her chest. The idea didn't scare her, but it did shift something. She nodded. Let's go, she said. They didn't speak as they walked. The beach stretched long, open and exposed, as if the world wanted to watch what happened next. The box was wedged beneath the overhang of a dune, half covered in seagrass and foam-crusted sand. It was wider than the others, flatter, less a chest, more a slab. And as soon as Lila touched it, she knew. This one doesn't want to be opened, she whispered. Milo stopped. Then maybe we shouldn't. But Lila was already brushing the sand away, carefully outlining its edges. The shape was almost perfect, a long rectangle with rounded corners and no lid seam. No hinges, no lock. It didn't open. It held. She turned to the feather, still tucked safely in Milo's satchel. Give it to me? Milo hesitated, then nodded. Lila drew a slow line across the surface of the box. Nothing happened. So she drew a second line, crossing the first, forming an X. Still nothing. Then, the feather in her hand stiffened. The line she had drawn began to glow, not with light, but with contrast. As if the sand had darkened around it. As if the world had quieted beneath it. And just like that, a small, curved notch appeared on the side of the box. Milo leaned down. It's shaped like a coin, Lila finished. The stone one. She placed it gently in the groove. It clicked, not a mechanical sound, but a soft, deep note. Like something old and heavy relaxing. The box shuddered. Then it began to dissolve. Not crack. Not open. Dissolve. The sand beneath it shifted, and the box's surface blurred, like fog spreading across glass. When it cleared, the box was gone. In its place, nestled in a dip of still settling sand, lay something small and round. A compass. Not copper. This one was made of pale wood, bleached and smoothed by years in the sun and salt. Its face was carved with points, but no letters. The needle inside was made of shell. And it spun, not north, but toward the sea. Lila picked it up. It was warm and lighter than she expected. She held it up, letting the breeze touch it. And the needle stopped, pointing straight toward the water. But not the shore. Not the waves. Beyond. That night, they brought all the coins back to the small house near the dunes. They laid them on the old wooden table, each in the order they'd been found. The first, gleaming. The second etched with curves. The third dull and marked with a horizon. And the fourth made of stone, which had opened a box by not opening it at all. The wooden compass sat beside them, still pointing toward something neither of them could see. Milo lit a lantern, and its light flickered gently across the table. Lila opened her notebook and turned to the last page. She didn't write a map. She didn't write a story. She wrote 4 words. It was never buried. Then she closed the book. Because this wasn't the end. Not yet. There was still something waiting. Just past the place the compass pointed. Chapter 5, The Line on the Horizon. Lila stood at the water's edge, barefoot and still, with the wooden compass cradled in both hands. The needle hadn't moved since last night. It pointed not east or west, not toward Titipools or dunes, but straight ahead, out past the swells, toward the line where sky and water touched. Milo walked up beside her, his shoes in one hand, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. His hair was tousled from the wind, and his skin smelled faintly of salt and driftwood. "Any change?" he asked. Lila shook her head slowly. "It still wants us to follow." The two of them looked out together, squinting against the bright morning. But there was nothing. Just distance. The kind of open space that made your chest feel like it had its own tide. They waited 3 days. Not because they were afraid, but because they knew what kind of decision this was. The sea didn't offer halfway things. And whatever waited at the end of the compass needle wouldn't wait forever. So, on the 4th morning, they packed. Not like explorers, with gear and tools and goals, but like 2 people who understood they were already part of the story, and now it was time to walk a little deeper into it. They brought the compass, the coins, 1 small pack each, light and simple, and the notebook, now nearly full of lines and sketches and questions too big for words. They left everything else behind. The small house, the worn mugs on the shelf, the trail of prints from yesterday's walk. All of it. Because this wasn't the kind of journey you made with luggage. It was the kind you made with your hands open. They didn't take a boat. That would have made too much sense. Instead, they followed the tide. Not into the water, but alongside it. A path opened. Not visible, exactly, but noticeable. The beach began to stretch in ways it hadn't before. The dunes grew taller, more windswept. The sand darkened in places, almost silvery. Shells appeared in tight spirals, or laid out in strange, repeating patterns. And the sea? It stayed beside them. Close enough to touch, but never too close. Like a friend walking just a little behind. On the 2nd day, the beach bent. Not a normal curve, but a long, slow arc that seemed to wrap around something invisible. Like they were walking the rim of a circle too large to see all at once. That night, they found a piece of driftwood with carvings in it. Not letters. Not symbols. Marks. 2 deep slashes, then 3 small dots, then a curve. Lila placed it beside the wooden compass. The needle paused, then ticked once to the left. Milo raised his eyes. "We're close." Lila didn't answer. She was staring at the sand just beyond the fire they built. There, pressed perfectly into the earth, were 2 shallow indentations, like coins, side by side. The next morning, the beach ended. Not abruptly, but with a sense of arrival. A final stretch of sand led to a wide, flat expanse of smooth stone, worn down by centuries of waves. It jutted into the sea like a tongue, pale and glistening. At the very tip of the stone shelf, something waited. A round disc of metal, brass or maybe bronze, set flush into the ground. Milo stepped forward. Lila held out the coins, one in each hand. As she knelt, she saw the outline, 2 perfect circles, etched into the surface beside the metal plate. She placed each coin into its space. The air shifted. No sound. No flash. Just a feeling, like a deep breath, taken by something far larger than either of them. The coin sank. Only a fraction. Then, with a soft click, the brass disc at the center began to turn. What opened was not a hatch, not a door, but a memory. A clear, circular sheet of water began to rise, not spilling, but foaming upward, as if being poured from below. Inside it, sheeps danced. Not reflections. Not fish. Moments. Scenes. A boy leaving something precious beneath a dune. A girl standing at a shoreline, whispering a promise. Hands holding a box that wasn't meant to be opened until now. The images shimmered, then faded. Lila reached out a hand, but didn't touch. Milo stared, eyes wide. "It's showing us where the coins have been." "No," Lila said. "It's showing us what the coins kept." She stepped back. Because it was clear now, the coins had never been about treasure. They were markers, placeholders, reminders of things the ocean refused to let slip away. The circle of water collapsed gently, returning to the stone with a whisper. The coins didn't rise. The compass didn't move. But the sky above them shifted, from overcast gray to soft, brilliant gold. Sunlight spilled across the wet rock. And in that warmth, Lila and Milo understood something without needing to say it. They hadn't found anything. They had been found. By the tide. By the coins. By the box that only opened once the time was right. That night, they walked back. Not because they were done, but because the story was. At least for now. They left the compass at the edge of the stone shelf, where it would face the sea for whoever came next. And they wrote one final page in the notebook. 2 coins. 1 tide. 1,000 moments held by the sand. And then they let the page go. The wind carried it. The sea caught it. and the beach made space for the next story.